Chapter 30 continued. So this is lecture part 2 of chapter 30. Blood vessels and transport. The circulatory system transports materials throughout the body. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. Now we're going to get into detail about blood vessels and transport. Arteries, veins, and capillaries are the ones that transport blood to all parts of the body. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. So we talked a little bit about that yesterday, and blood is under great pressure. Arteries are thicker and more muscular, so they have thicker walls, and as you can kind of see here, there's also something in between the arteries and the capillaries called the arterioles, and then there's something in between the vein and the capillaries called venules. And this is just showing you some differences between an artery and a vein. Veins are usually much thinner. They have valves, so arteries do not have valves. Now there are some exceptions to these, but generally speaking, and for what you guys need to know, is veins are the ones that have valves to allow blood flow to go one way and not the other. Prevents backflow of blood because that would not be good. And then in the middle here is the connective tissue, and this is the endothelium. We talked about those prefixes there. Endo means inner or inside. Exo means outside. But these are on the inside, so they're endothelium. Veins, on the other hand, carry blood back to the heart. Blood is under less pressure. They're thinner walled, but larger diameter. And valves prevent backflow. And the capillaries are what's responsible for moving blood in between all of that. Now we're going to talk about blood pressure. So blood pressure is a measure of the force of blood pushing against artery walls. That's, in fancy terms, what blood pressure is. Now, if we were in class, we had a few labs that we were going to do on blood pressure, but I might just demonstrate them here or have you guys do a little mini at-home labs. I haven't quite decided yet, but we'll see. So there's something called systolic pressure and diastolic pressure. The systolic pressure is as the left ventricle contracts, and diastolic is when the left ventricle relaxes. So your blood pressure is the systolic over diastolic numbers. So your systolic pressure occurs when the left ventricle contracts. Diastolic pressure occurs when the ventricle relaxes. You can write these numbers as a fraction in which systolic pressure is always on top. That's what blood pressure is. If you're ever wondering what the numbers mean, if the doctor says your blood pressure is 120/70, that's your systolic versus your diastolic number in fraction form, also known as your blood pressure. Okay, I feel like a lot of you already know this, but lifestyle plays a key role in circulatory diseases. So some choices lead to an increased risk of circulatory diseases and heart attacks. So smoking, long-term stress, excessive weight, lack of exercise, diet low in fruits and vegetables, high in saturated fats. The majority of saturated fats are not good for you. I think I talked to your class about this, but there's different saturated fats. So generally speaking, they say saturated fats are the ones that are solid at room temperature, and unsaturated fats are the ones that are liquid at room temperature. So for instance, olive oil is an unsaturated fat. It's liquid at room temperature. Something that's a saturated fat would be like margarine or something like that, butter. But the thing with that is your body can break down short chain saturated fats pretty easily. It can't break down long-chain saturated fats very easily. So a lot of processed things that contain saturated fats are the long-chain saturated fats. Coconut oil, on the other hand, and even butter are shorter-chained saturated fats. So those your body can break down with pretty much no big deal. So those ones aren't nearly as bad for you as like processed saturated fats. Circulatory disease affect mainly the heart and the arteries. So this is a cross-section here of an artery. And what you see in the center here is called plaque. And this plaque blocks blood flow in arteries. So if this is the artery wall here, and blood's supposed to be able to move through this whole inner part, but there's a bunch of plaque in the way, your blood's obviously not going to be able to flow through there as easily or nicely. and it's going to cause all kinds of problems and even a heart attack. All right, blood is actually a tissue. For those of you that did not know that, there's a little fact for you. Blood is actually a tissue, and it transports materials. So this is a really cool picture here because this is centrifuged blood. So when you centrifuge blood, meaning you put it in like this little apparatus that spins it around really, really fast, so it's going to separate out what's heavier towards the bottom, what's lighter towards the top. Blood is made mostly of plasma, which is that clear yellowish stuff. And then these are all the red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets down here that were heavier that got pulled to the bottom. Plasma is actually mostly water. But these are the components that make up your blood: plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Most of these cells down here, out of all three of these, are red blood cells. Plasma is a key factor in maintaining homeostasis. So the molecules diffuse into and out of plasma. They contain proteins, lots of proteins, that stabilize blood volume. They contain clotting factors, and they contain immune proteins. So basically your plasma contains lots of different types of proteins. So bone marrow is what produces most of your blood components, mainly your red blood cells. So the components of red blood cells are mainly coming from your bone marrow. These are what platelets look like under a microscope. This is a white blood cell here. And then these are red blood cells. I always thought red blood cells looked kind of like those Lifesaver candies, not like maybe it's not Lifesavers, I don't know what I'm trying to think of. I think it was actually like a cough drop brand, but they looked like this where they didn't have a hole in the center, it was just flattened in the center. So they kind of look like this, but I can't remember what they were called, but they always reminded me of that. All right, so red blood cells, like I said, they make up the majority of all of your blood cells, so 40 to 45%, almost half. They transport oxygen because of hemoglobin to cells and carry away carbon dioxide. They're one of the few cells that do not have any nuclei. So red blood cells, most cells have nuclei, right? But red blood cells do not have nuclei, and they contain hemoglobin, which is what oxygen will bind to. White blood cells, as you may know, are the ones that help your immune system. So they fight pathogens and destroy foreign matter. If you've ever heard of someone who has a low white blood cell count, that means they're immunocompromised, which means they are highly susceptible to catching diseases and viruses and that sort of thing. All right, now we're getting into some blood types. So this stuff is kind of fun. I love this stuff. But protein markers define blood types and Rh factors. So there's not just type A, B, and O blood groups. There's actually something called Rh factors that are on all those different blood types. So you might have thought that there's just 4 different categories of blood types: AB, A, and B, and O. But that is true, but there's something called Rh factors that makes them all a little bit different. So an Rh factor can be negative or positive. So like, let's just say you have type A negative blood, or maybe you have B positive blood. So those positives and negatives are Rh factors. Blood types must be compatible for transfusions. So, for instance, if you have type A blood, you can't get type B blood from someone. However, there's such thing as the universal donor and the universal recipient. So if you have type O blood, this is the one that you can give to pretty much to anyone. So you are the universal donor. Places like the Red Cross and the companies that are in charge of getting blood donations, they love when people have type O blood because your blood can literally go to anyone. However, if you have type O blood and you need a transfusion, so maybe you got into a car accident and you lost a lot of blood and you needed a blood transfusion, the only type of blood that you could get is type O. So even though you're the universal donor, you can give your blood to anybody, you can't accept anyone else's blood unless they're type O as well. If you're type AB blood, then you are the universal recipient, meaning you can get type A, type B, or type O blood. So this is just showing you who can donate to who. So type A blood can donate to A and AB, and they can receive from type A or type O. And this is kind of what I just talked about with the universal donor and receiver. Here's the RH factors. Let me let that little box go away in a second here. All right, so the RH positive factor can donate to any other positive RH factors. But if you're positive, you can receive from RH positive or RH negative. So if you have RH positive blood, that's awesome because, like, let's just say you had type AB positive. You are the universal donor. You can basically receive anybody's blood. If you are AB negative, you have to receive blood that is either type A or B or O, but it has to have that negative factor in there. All right, platelets are the ones that help form clots that control bleeding. So your platelets, like let's just say you get a paper cut on your fingertip and it's bleeding profusely right away. And let's say you wipe off the blood and you let it go for a few days. So you don't put any medication on it, you don't put a Band-Aid on it, nothing. You kind of just let it heal on its own, right? So in a few days, it's going to start to go away. And within even a few minutes, maybe hours, it's going to completely seal up, so it's not going to be bleeding anymore. You're not going to bleed out from a paper cut unless you have other issues going on. But your platelets are what help to basically plug up that cut. Once you get a cut, your body senses it, and it's going to send platelets towards that area that are flowing through your blood. And something called fibrin, which is like that net-like structure, is going to come in and help the platelets. It's like a sticky substance and hold them in place. So more platelets are going to get attracted to that spot, more fibrin, and then it's eventually going to seal it up. And in a few days, you'll be completely healed and you won't even know you had a paper cut. So blood is pretty cool. There's another lab with blood in school. We can't use real blood because that's a major biohazard. But there was some fake blood that I was going to use to demonstrate a lab. Maybe I'll have to do that at home. I don't have all the materials, so I'll try to get creative and see if I can come up with something. If I can, then I'll make a video or something, or do an online video, send you guys an online one to watch or something like that. I'll see what I can do. All right, last section here. This is the lymphatic system. Something called lymph is collected from tissues and returned to the circulatory system. So the lymphatic system collects fluid that leaks out of the capillaries. I'm just going to pause here for a second. If you've ever heard of a lymphatic drainage massage, basically they kind of massage your lymph nodes. I don't even know fully how they do it, but apparently it helps with water retention because you can have a lot of fluid build up in your lymph nodes, causing swelling or whatever. But they can do a lymphatic drainage massage, and apparently it helps with the swelling there. All right, lymph vessels have valves to prevent backflow, so lymph vessels also have valves. Lymph nodes filter the lymph and destroy foreign matter. Lymph vessels return cleaned fluid to the circulatory system. If lymph vessels or nodes are damaged, lymph collects in an area. When you're sick, I mean, at least if you've ever gone to the doctor when you're sick, they're going to feel your lymph nodes, which are like right kind of under your jaw, under your jawbone. When you're sick the next time, go ahead and feel those. They'll be really tender and sore to touch, and they might be really swollen. You also have something called occipital lymph nodes. You have lymph nodes kind of all over your body, but these are the major big ones that you can actually feel when you're sick. If you go move your hands to the back of your head, like the base of your neck on both sides, there's kind of like a crease in the middle of the back of your neck and head, and it's right off to the sides, kind of like down onto the right, off to the sides of that, if that makes sense. You have occipital lymph nodes there, and those will get really swollen too sometimes when you're sick. So next time you're sick, which, I mean, I hope none of you get sick anytime soon, but if you feel your lymph nodes, they might be a little bit swollen. Allergies can also cause lymph nodes to become swollen. Okay, going on to the next one. So the lymphatic system is a major part of the immune system. You've probably heard that before, but structures in the lymphatic system help fight disease. Your tonsils filter bacteria and viruses. Your thymus develops white blood cells, which are needed for your immune system. Your spleen is included in there as well, which filters lymph, which is the liquid in your lymph nodes, and contains immune cells. Lymphocytes help destroy pathogens, parasites, and foreign matter. So lymphocytes are basically lymph cells. Cytes means cells. All right, that takes us to the end of chapter 30. So you guys will do another little mini quiz on this section, lecture part 2, for chapter 30, and then I'll see if I can come up with any labs to implement in here. If we are back at school by the end of the year, which I'm really hoping we are, I've saved the last week just to do all kinds of labs. So even if we don't get to the lab this upcoming week, then we definitely will the end of the school year, whether we're doing that online or back in the classroom.